Thank you to everyone for choosing to spend your noon hour here with us today. Um, Today, we're going to talk about grant funding opportunities for value-added businesses here in the state of Missouri. And this is a partnership with our MASBDA, Missouri Agricultural and Small Business Development Authority, and the Missouri Agriculture, Food, and Forestry Innovation Center. And you will be hearing more about both of these entities as we go. This recording is being, we are recording the webinar, so that will be available to you afterwards. And I'm trying to advance, there we go. We encourage your questions. We're going to start our webinar with a presentation. Please enter your questions in the chat. We'll have a Q&A session about halfway through, so by 12:30 or sooner, where we just jump into answering your questions. Anything that we're not able to answer, we'll be sure to include in a follow-up email that goes out to everyone who registered, along with the link to the webinar recording. So to give a few introductions, my name is Mallory Ray, and I work with the Missouri Ag, Food, and Forestry Innovation Center as a business counselor. And I'm very pleased to be joined here today by Marla Young with MASBDA. She's an agricultural loan officer, and her colleague Jacob Stair. So thank you so much, Marla and Jacob, for joining us today. As we get started, I just want to remind everyone, when you are a business and you are seeking financing opportunities, there's a lot of different programs out there. There's a lot of different ways to bring financing into your business. When you are thinking about pursuing a grant, we want to help you use your time efficiently and think about what is your greatest need as a business. Because there are a lot of different grant opportunities. As you can see here, these are grants that all focus on building value-added agricultural businesses. And some of these grants are very specific as to what types of need they will fund. And when I say that, what kinds of eligible expenses are associated with a need that a business can apply for. I'm going to break this down for you, but this is kind of like just to show you there's a messy world out there. If your business has a need for more research, there's a pretty distinct set of programs that fund on-farm or in-business research. Some of these grants fund a secondary outcome, which is to provide demonstration or education to other producers or the public. We don't view that as a primary focus for a value-added business that is looking to really become sustainable and increase its sales and revenue and profits. So we don't focus on that as a grant funding opportunity, just like we don't focus on grants designed for nonprofits alone, just so you kind of understand the landscape of what we're talking about today. So we're going to set the research side up over to the side. And we're going to talk more about these other needs in a business: capacity building, planning, working capital or capital expenditures, training, or technical assistance. And a really key question becomes, are you working alone in your business, or are you working collectively with other producers or partners? Because if you think about that question, there are some grants right now that target organized efforts. The Farmers Market Promotion Program, Local Food Promotion Program, and Regional Food System Partnerships. All of these grants are open right now, but they all have this organized effort, collaboration across producers and other entities. So we're going to also sort of set those aside. And today you're going to hear a lot more about the grant opportunities that are available to single businesses, everything that appears down here. And you can see that a lot of these are state grants offered by Missouri. Some of them are targeted to producers or food businesses that have a focus on a particular market. So institutions working in urban areas or low income food insecure areas in urban areas. So we're going to talk more about this. And just to remind you, here is our focus. You can see there is one federal grant that really does, it is available for individual businesses. And it just opened on Friday and it closes in 2 months. And that's the Value Added Producer Grant offered through the USDA. And it funds both planning projects and working capital or capital expenditures. We're going to talk more about that after we hear from the MAFFIC team. And the state has really worked to fill gaps by helping to advance independent businesses in this space to be more effective and grow their business. So you're going to hear about each of these programs today. And just as a reminder, one of the programs that the MAFFIC team will talk about is currently open. And I'll be talking more about the Value Added Producer Grant later. With that, I'll turn it over to MAFFIC.
Hello, everybody. And yes, thanks for your time learning more about our programs. Many thanks to Mallory and her team at MAFFIC. They've done a fabulous job of helping us get our word out about our existing programs and our new programs. So very thankful for her work. So MAFFIC, Missouri Ag and Small Business Development Authority, just really quick to kind of give you a lay of the land. So we're a commission housed within the Missouri Department of Agriculture. We're a small team. I mean, there's currently 4 of us here. We pride ourselves on customer service. Never ever hesitate to pick up the phone or drop us an email. You'll see our contact information here in a bit. I mean, we are always more than happy to visit with you about your project, how any of our programs or any programs that we know of, might fit into your business plan. Never apologize for picking up the phone and giving us a call. We are kind of considered the financing arm of the Missouri Department of Agriculture. However, we receive very little general revenue tax funding, and I'll get into that in just a minute. Next slide. So Jacob and I are going to cover 2 of our existing value-added agriculture grants, not the SEGA grants. I mean, we'll get to those, but our primary focus in introducing our value-added grant. So these 2 programs are actually funded by the sale of tax credits, agriculture product utilization contributor tax credits. From here on out, I'll just say ag product tax credits. They have actually funded our existing planning grant and our farm to table grant for the past several years. The new grants, the new SEGA grants that were just announced March 1st are funded through the state annual budget process, general revenue funding. Next slide. So the proceeds from the sale of our tax credits are used for financial and technical assistance to rural ag business concepts in the form of the 2 grants that we'll touch on today, as well as a down payment assistance loan that you can read more about. Our website is very easy to navigate, masbita.com. So we accept contributions for ag product tax credits during a set period once a year, and that is currently open. Applicants for these 2 value-added grant programs are required to find contributors for half the amount of their grant application amount. So, for example, if you apply for a planning grant or a farm to table grant in the amount of $50,000, you are required to work with someone or someones, plural, to find a contributor of $25,000. We sell tax credits to help fund the program, and then you're required to find local commitment of your project. You don't have to buy tax credits to support your own project. We only require a commitment form with the grant application. The contributor is only required to contribute if your grant is funded. So there's no money up front, nothing like that. And we're happy to visit with you about that. Tax credits can be purchased by individuals, by banks, by local businesses, anyone with a state tax liability, an income tax liability, not sales tax. I mean, your lumber yard, your car dealer, your equipment dealer, any of your friends or neighbors are eligible and might be interested in purchasing tax credits. The purchase of tax credits are an excellent way to direct your tax liability that we all have, or probably all have, to value-added programs here at MASBDA instead of going to general revenue. I mean, with all due respect to, the other things that general revenue funds in state government, state services that we take advantage of every day. If you purchase an ag product tax credit, that money comes straight to us to go out in the form of grants or other assistance. Tax credits may be applied quarterly and can be assigned or transferred. Next slide. So the Value-Added Agriculture Grant Program is what I call our planning grant. Adds value to Missouri ag commodities, aids the economy of a rural community, development, processing, and marketing of ag products. So as we go through what it can and can't be used for, think this can be used for planning activities that are necessary to get you to the point of seeking financing. Can't be used to buy or build anything, but all of the planning work that has to go into your business plan so that you know how much you need to know what your budget is. Maximum grant is $200,000 per value-added concept. So, you might have a meat processing project this year. 2 years from now, you might be looking into, a food grade corn mill or something like that. That would be a totally different concept. We hope to open this. We plan to open this application period this fall, maybe in October, with a December deadline, and funding probably announced in March of 24. That's a year from now. But, and I know that seems a long time away, but really it's not. The timing is perfect really right now to start thinking about your project or that project that you have on the shelf. You're actually in very good timing for that. So don't be discouraged by that December deadline. Next slide. So planning grant can be used to work with a third party for a feasibility study, a marketing study, legal assistance for business formation, a marketing plan, a business plan to so that you know, again, what your budget is, prospectus development, perhaps some operational consulting. Maybe you need an architect or an engineer, to look at a building or, that has some special structural needs. It can't be used for startup or expansion, debt, overhead, production cost, operational, buying or building anything. It's to get you to the point of starting operation. Next slide. So examples of past successful projects to kind of get you thinking. A feasibility study, marketing plan, business plan for a fluid dairy to explore bottling their own milk in glass bottles. Feasibility study and business plan for a farmer-owned ethanol plant. Each one of the state's farmer-owned ethanol and biodiesel plants started out with business plans funded by MASBDA. Marketing plan and a business plan for an orchard to figure out if they could afford to pasteurize the apple cider that they made to take that next step so that supermarkets would carry it. They sold it on farm, but they needed help with, working out the business side of purchasing a pasteurizer, and then explore a new product, vinegar, from their fruit. A feasibility study, marketing plan, and business plan to explore producing hard spirits from a family orchard, eau de vie from their apples. Feasibility study and business plan to explore adding lavender, you pick fruit, and a wedding venue to a small family farm. In this particular project, they did add the lavender and are currently planting apple and peach trees, blueberry and strawberries, that type of thing. But when the numbers came back on the wedding venue, they decided that, that was too much. They couldn't work that into their business plan near term. It might be a long-term project, but they had the numbers to make that decision. And we still consider that a success. Did they build that wedding venue? No, that's okay. They had the information they needed to make that decision. And I'm going to turn it over to Jacob to talk about our Farm to Table grant program.
Thanks, Marla. So for the Farm to Table grant program is kind of in the value-added agriculture grant family. This grant provides funding for Missouri small businesses to access resources to process locally grown agricultural products for use in institutions here in Missouri. So a lot of people, think farm to table. Oh, could that be direct to consumer, direct, retail sales? It's specifically for folks that are selling product to their local institutions. Like the value added grant, the maximum grant to any small business is $200,000. Institutions include, but are not necessarily limited to schools, correctional facilities, hospitals, nursing homes, long-term care facilities, military bases. Institutions must make up a material portion of an eligible applicant's market, and that material portion is defined as 10% or more of gross sales after grant funding must be to institutions. We typically run these two grant programs on the same timeline. So looking at a December application with funding announced in March of 2024. Next slide, please. So unlike the value-added grant, which is a planning grant, the Farm to Table grant can pay for select processing and packaging equipment. So coolers, freezers, washing equipment for produce, bagging or packaging equipment for a value-added business could be used for professional services associated with GAP or HACCP training. Grant funds cannot be used to pay off any existing debt, salaries or wages for the applicant or any employees that they might have. Can't be used for any actual production costs. So if you are a business that is going to be selling produce to sell into their local school, it can't pay for the seed, can't pay for fertilizer, anything like that. No operating expenses for the business, vehicles, travel, or the application fee or any grant writing expenses. Next slide, please. So just a couple of examples to hit. So like I mentioned, a vegetable producer growing produce, tomatoes in high tunnels. If they want to build a wash pack facility to be able to safely sell that to their local school district, that might be an eligible project. Or it could be a meat processor who purchases packaging equipment to allow them to meet their hospital's demand for their product, whatever it's sausages or hamburger, whatever that might be. A couple of kind of key notes with this grant program. It is best to apply if your business already has demand from local institutions that you're currently unable to meet. We see a lot of people that hear about this grant and they get excited and they say, oh, institutional sales are going to be easy. I go to church with the superintendent and I can sure get my product into that school. And the reality is selling product to institutions is hard. And you shouldn't necessarily change your business model, who your key market is going to be based off of, one grant program. So if institutions are a market that you're already working in or you have strong interest in, this might be a good option for you. Next slide, please. So those were kind of our two value-added agriculture grants that we have and we have run in the past. This next slide is on our ShowMe Entrepreneurial Grants for Agriculture, or SEGA grants, as you've probably heard them referred to. These are our new programs. We just opened them up here at the beginning of March, and applications for all of these are going to be due April 28th at 5 p.m. Just to highlight that. So there's 4 grant programs within the SEGA suite. So there's a technical assistance grant program with a maximum of award of $7,500, a 25% cash match on all of these grants. So the technical assistance can pay for a marketing plan, slotting fees or distribution costs, e-commerce, website development for a business, consulting and working with an attorney for any legal expenses, setting up the business, tax planning, or regulatory compliance costs. The workforce development is our other small grant. So the maximum is $5,000, also with a 25% cash match. This is for businesses that are hiring and training new employees, or sending them to some sort of certification course. So it could be a business that is hiring a driver and sending them to CDL school. Or it could be a meat processor that brings somebody in and brings a third party in to train all of their employees on a specific piece of equipment, for example. The innovation grant is our larger grant that's available for value-added producers. So the maximum is $250,000, also with a 25% cash match. So this can be used to expand facilities, equipment, or purchase equipment, make upgrades to equipment or facilities. It could also be used for marketing, production, or coordination efforts for a value-added business. The fee offset grant program is not a direct grant that producers apply for. This is for businesses that are working with a food process authority to either have testing done or have a process authority letter written for a product. So we can essentially pay those costs directly to that process authority on behalf of the producer. And there is no match associated with this. And for folks that have questions about the SEGA grant program, Marla and I, and then MAFFIC, we did a webinar on March 9th. Where we go into a lot more detail on all of these different grant programs. It's posted on the SEGA webpage at the bottom. I would highly encourage anybody interested in finding out more to give that a listen. Next slide, please. Here's some just contact information. Like Marla mentioned, we're a small shop. Jill Wood is our executive director, and then myself and Marla are loan officers here. This is our direct contact information. Please feel free to reach out, like Marla mentioned. Any questions about these grant programs, we're happy to visit with you and see how these grants might fit into your business model. Next slide, please. And then this is just a good way to stay connected with what we're doing here at MASBDA and also the Department of Agriculture. So if you go to agriculture.mo.gov, that's the main MDA website. In the top right corner, there is a button where it says Get Updates. That's a way to sign up for email updates from the department. And whenever we post value-added and farm to table grant applications, we make those announcements later this fall. That'll go out on the email update. So it's a good way to stay connected with us. Next slide, please.
So that was the MASBDA team. You heard about the grant programs that they administer. I want to take just a minute and point out 2 other programs that are also administered within the Missouri Department of Agriculture, but not by the MASBDA team. And these are the Food Insecure Urban Ag Matching Grant and the Urban Ag Matching Grant. This is a brief description of both of these programs. You can see the funding levels vary. Both require a 25% match. At least half of the match must be cash, but these do allow in-kind match contributions, unlike the SEGA program. And these have very specific purposes. So the first one really is focused on increasing the availability of food within those food insecure urbanized areas, which are defined. You can learn more from the Department of Ag page on this grant program. And this accompanying grant focuses more on agribusiness development. So learn more. The grant programs were ran last summer and fall. They could come back again later in 2022, subject to decisions on the final state budget. And as Jacob just said, the best way to hear about this is to subscribe to updates from the Missouri Department of Agriculture. So I'll talk very briefly about the USDA Value-Added Producer Grant. And I want to first start by referring back to something that Marla said earlier. When she was talking about the Missouri version of this program, the Missouri Value-Added Agricultural Grant, which focuses on the planning side only. SEGA is sort of the new state program that parts of it address working capital and purchasing of equipment. This program is open now. It closes May 11th. But you heard Marla say now is not too late to start thinking about your application for December for the state program. And I thought that was very insightful of her, because grants are very attractive to a lot of people. It's this opportunity to just sort of get free capital, right? But it takes a lot of focus to think through, why am I doing this? And I always want to encourage people to don't do anything you didn't already want to do with your business. Many people are in a situation where they feel like they could take their business in a variety of directions. They could focus on this product or that target market. They could add on this service or that feature for their customer. And they're trying to figure out which customers are most important to them, what their differences in profit per item are across these markets. And someone sees a grant opportunity, and what we don't want to have happen is for somebody to completely derail their focus of what they thought was best for their business in order to chase a grant. If you've never heard about this grant opportunity before, I encourage you to read more about it. And there is very lengthy, I'm going to hold up the Federal Register notice on this grant, because things at the state level are relatively simple and easier to understand. When the federal government does a grant program, you really have to sift through the fine print and look at anything that might have changed from the last time the grant became available, and really be careful with what you're doing. If you've never heard of this grant, I would tell you, you may find it very, very challenging to apply by this cycle, but don't get discouraged. You can think about this in future cycles. This grant has been going for a long time and comes back at regular intervals. There are two different levels, the planning grants and the working capital grants. They vary in total funding. I want to emphasize just a few pieces before we go to your questions. So definitions really matter. Value-added production, the federal government has, very clear definitions, and this idea of the business being producer owned, and the producer that is submitting the grant application must be providing the majority of the agricultural input that is being turned into a value-added product. This second line here, this may sound like a bunch of gobbledygook, but anytime you go after a federal grant program, you do have to navigate more and more layers of complexity. So you need to get a SAM registration for your business. You need a unique entity identifier in order to do that. And there are several technical forms that you must submit, more so than you'll find at the state level. This grant also requires either letters of support or commitment from outside entities. So again, to be more competitive, You really need to sort of have a lot of time to sit and think with your ideas, run your ideas by other people, and get them to offer you a letter of support where they see the value in your project, or a letter of commitment where they're going to help you in your project. You also need a work plan and a budget. USDA tells people to work on an application for at least 1 month, which I think is maybe the bare minimum time. You might be able to finish an application, but I think it would be very challenging to be highly competitive on that timeline. So that's what I'll add about this grant opportunity. And just as a reminder, the grants you heard about today, this is a summary table that is available in the publication that Alice made available in the chat already. We collaborated with MASBDA to put this information together because we're really trying to increase awareness and reduce confusion around just the whole complexity of programs. So with that, let's start turning to the chat. And I'm going to go back up to the top. So MASBDA, there was a question that came in. Does MASBDA do the feasibility study, or do they refer you to someone?
That's a good question, Mallory. And that is something that I kind of skipped over. So we do not do the feasibility study or the marketing plan or the business plan. We ask that you work with a third-party consultant, and because a third party can bring a whole wealth of information to your project. If you do not have someone in mind, we're happy to send a list of folks who have worked on projects previously, so that you can visit with them individually. The reason we ask that you work with a third party is it's no different than if you're making home improvement to your house. If you're redoing your bathroom or a new front door, you think you know what you want. But when you bring someone else in to look at it differently, they say, well, have you ever thought about this? Or would you like this? Or, I don't know about that. So yes, a third party.
Then there's a question regarding the SEGA Innovation Grant Program and the 25% cash match. Can it be money provided by a lender? Does it need to be available at the time the grant application is submitted?
Good question, and that's one we've received a few times. So to the first part, yes, it can be a loan from a bank, your operating line of credit, or a specific term loan that you take out. But yes, a loan is just fine. As far as when it needs to be available, it does not necessarily have to be available at the time the grant application is submitted. You as the applicant will have to certify and say, yes, this is the cash match that's going to be required for my project, and I will have access to that, whether it's cash on hand or whether it's a loan from a bank. But it needs to be available throughout the project. On these larger innovation grant programs, we will need to see that the awardee has met their cash match. They've put their skin in the game. They have paid for a piece of equipment before we can make a final disbursement.
Thank you. So here's a question. Does the amount of the grant application in the grant application, is that part of the approval, considered for approval? By that, I mean, if I can add value to an ag product with a $75,000 grant, but I can add even more value with a $140,000 grant, perhaps the question is, which one might I be more competitive submitting?
So I can take that one, and that's also a very good question. So our value added and our farm to table grant and the SEGA grants are scored on a competitive basis. A 100-point scoring criteria. Our existing grants have a little bit different scoring criteria than the SEGA grants, but really it all boils down to economic development potential, credibility, and merit. So if you have the numbers, I mean, you'll have to look at you'll have to look at your numbers. If if you feel if the $140,000 ask is credible, if you can show us that you can process this many more pounds of product, this many more employees, this many more, a dollar per pound or per product. I mean, that's what you need to focus on. And cost benefit ratio is an important part of the review process. Is it credible? Or are you just asking for $140,000? So I hope that's helpful.
A specific question, I produce grapes for local wineries. What equipment grants are available?
That's a good question, and Marla, maybe jump in if you have any other insight. Most of the ones, the grants that we've been talking about today, are not necessarily intended for agricultural production. They're more for the value that somebody is adding to the ag product. So, in this specific example, I'm not aware of any grants, for the production cost of the wine. What we would focus a little more on would be on the winery side, where they're taking those grapes and processing them.
No, I agree. I don't know of anything for strict production equipment.
For the SEGA grants, is it better to be an LLC or an individual, or does it matter?
I don't think it matters. I mean, it just depends how you're structured, how your business is structured. Now, I might point out one of the SEGA categories is technical assistance, and that can be used for legal advice if you're looking at your business structure itself, if you're expanding or bringing in a family member or something like that. Don't overlook that category as an important piece that might be available to you.
Continue to add your questions to the chat if you have them. I want to talk very briefly about our center, the Missouri Ag, Food, and Forestry Innovation Center. We are a statewide network of partners that are focusing on supporting value-added producers with technical resources and assistance. And these are our areas of focus: business planning and startup, product and process development. We're collaborating with the Missouri's new Food Process Authority, CONTHA, here at the University of Missouri. We also offer financial analysis, some marketing assistance, and then referrals to other groups and entities and organizations across the state that are all in this same space. We're not trying to duplicate efforts, but fill in the gaps and support people. There's no cost to access these services, and you can sign up online at our website. There's a QR code here. And there was a question put in the chat for just the panelists. And the question was, is there a group or panel to help review applications before turning in the grants? So when we think about preparing grants, it's always a good idea to get someone else to look at your proposal. It will only make it stronger, whether that is somebody else in your business, someone outside your business, someone who has done previous grant applications. Some people do hire professional grant writers to help with their applications. The MAFFIC is able to provide some grant assistance in terms of reviewing grant proposals and offering constructive feedback. I say that some because given the caveat of we need adequate time to sort of help you meet the grant deadlines. Writing a grant is a very intensive process, especially if you're going through it for the first time, and it can take several rounds of iterations, feedback, strengthening the proposal. So please reach out to us and we'll let you know how much assistance we can provide in terms of helping you refine and improve your grant applications. Again, that would be available to you at no cost. If a grant is awarded, once the project is complete, is subsequent reporting required? The answer is yes, and it varies based on the funder, which is something to consider as you look at different applications. And I'll let the MASBDA team talk a little bit about their programs and the reporting requirements.
Yeah, good question. It is going to depend on who on the grant program, who the grant is through. Like on our farm to table grant program, there are annual reports that you'll submit after the project is finished. So you'll report on overall gross sales to institutions, and then there's some short questions about what were some successes that you've had in the past year, or challenges that maybe you need to address. Maybe you didn't have as many sales to institutions as you thought. Well, why was that, and is there an opportunity to address that? With these SEGA grant programs. I don't think we have any reporting requirements laid out at this time, but like I said, for other grants, it's going to vary.
And I might jump in here real quick, not necessarily on reporting requirements, but going back to grant writing. I'm not going to speak about the USDA value-added producer grant, but the SEGA grant suite of programs and our existing value-added planning grant and our farm to table grant, those are specifically designed, and the application is formatted. We don't expect you to hire a grant writer, or to have to hire a grant writer to complete those applications. Our board of directors, our MASBDA commissioners, are the ones who will be scoring these grants and reading them. And they are farmers, they are bankers, they are small business people, they are people that you interact with every day, just the same as everybody. They don't want to see grant writing language. They don't just tell us who you are, what you're doing now, what you hope to accomplish if your project is funded, whether that's a planning grant, what do you want to find out and why? Or a SEGA grant, why will this piece of equipment impact your productivity and the wage you're being able to pay your employees? So do not feel intimidated by saying, I've never written a grant before. That's okay. We want to hear from you, the producer or the small business. Nobody knows your project better than you do.
Good point, Marla. The next question, can you give an example of how MAFFIC works? Sure, I'd be happy to. We just launched our services in January, and so we've been very focused on slowly getting our team together and getting all of our processes set up. But we're now working with, we've engaged over 30 individuals who've found us on the website, signed up for services, and our team has been meeting with those individuals. And I think of us as kind of a mentor in the process. We listen, we ask a lot of questions, we help business owners who are often very overwhelmed. Small business owners have to have the most diverse set of skills, and not everyone can be good at more than a couple things at one time, because we just don't have the energy and focus, right? As individuals, as people. So I think of the role of MAFFIC is to help a business owner kind of lay out their broad vision, which is often very broad, and we help you kind of take a step back and put some action towards achieving that vision. Along the way, we're going to stress test your ideas. We're going to send you to resources that we think are appropriate, additional pieces of information for you to consider. We're going to talk through low-cost ways for you to gain more insights into your own business from your customer base, and how you might start exploring new product ideas or different market channels. Some people think that they're ready to go straight to institutions. And Jacob, I was so happy that he talked about that earlier. They're reaching institutions is a very difficult task, a producer has to learn a lot along the way to be ready to meet that institutional buyer where they actually want to buy your product on a repeat basis. And if a producer has never worked with an institution before, or another producer who has done that, they may put all of their effort into pursuing, large institutions as a buyer. And the MAFFIC resources and counselors are people who can just help you talk about those ideas and, again, translate it into action. I hope that was helpful. Okay, so we did have a question again about the definition of institution, which Jacob went over earlier. I'll go back and pull that up. Here we go.
Yep. So Mallory, that is the definition that we have in our program guidelines, including but not limited to schools, correctional facilities, hospitals, nursing homes, long-term care facilities, and military bases. What I would recommend, if your business has a potential customer reach out and you're like, well, could they be considered an institution? I would for sure reach out to us individually, and we're happy to visit with you about that.
So, specific follow-up question, is a food pantry an institution?
Good question. We've had this come up before. A lot of times when we're talking about food pantries, that's in reference to donated food. So our farm to table grant program is evaluated based on sales. So if you're donating product, that wouldn't qualify.
Thanks for that clarification. So in our business, we have many ag value added facets as a farm-based business. Is it best to focus on one area, or is it okay to expand all areas in our expansion? That is a great question that's going to really vary on an individual basis. And it's the kind of question that we would love to get in more depth with you one-on-one. So because there's a lot to take in and a lot of factors to think about. So I would encourage you to reach out to MAFFIC. We'd be happy to work with you. If you have very specific ideas about one of these grant programs, reach out to the MASBTA team. And Marla and Jacob are phenomenal resources. I love how experienced they are, and they really want what's best for the state of Missouri. And that means not wasting anyone's time, but really helping people get to the heart of what's the best way for me to utilize this program if there's a fit. And if there's not a fit, then they'll help you realize that very quickly. So another question. Most discussion and questions have been about food products. My ag product is not food related. Does this matter?
So that's a good question. I mean, usually when we say value added agriculture, we are thinking about food products in our SEGA definition and in our value added grant definition. We don't say it has to be food related. Would be happy to take a phone call later, drop us an email to kind of flesh out what you're thinking and see how any of our programs might be able to fit.
Sometimes the non-food categories get a little confusing about whether you really are the producer of that value-added product. So do you own the inputs, or do you own the right to the inputs by either owning the land or a lease to the land? And here I'm thinking about trees and timber products, and specifically. But I think that's a great question. It varies program to program, and it's why reading the definitions very carefully is so important. A question: does honey extracting equipment qualify as a value added?
I think that it would, yes.
Marla and Jacob, can you take a minute and think back based on your experiences with MASBDA? And Marla, you talked about this a little bit about how farms might stack funding opportunities from different programs as they're really trying to advance a particular value-added concept. Or can you say anything about how you've seen producers in the state be successful in that area, and if there was kind of like a logical path they followed?
Right. And actually I do have an example in mind. So the USDA Value Added Producer Grant, which you covered, which is open now until May 11th. So that grant has two categories. A planning component, which is very similar to our Value Added Agriculture Grant feasibility study business plan. But the other category that you can apply for is operational capital. But in order to apply for the operational capital component, you have to have a feasibility study and a business plan as a part of your application. So that many times our planning grant, the results of our planning grant, a business plan, can be used and have been used to apply, the next year or 2 years. And business plans are meant to be, live documents. You adjust them as you move forward. But many times our feasibility study or business plan has been used subsequently in a value added producer grant application.
Great example. If you were wanting to open a meat processing facility, would this qualify under the innovation grant through the SEGA program?
It sure would. One note that I would add, when we're looking at this round of innovation grant funding, it's going to be important to look at the timeline that you have for opening the business. With all of these SEGA grants, our board is going to be looking at near-term impact. So, if you're applying for equipment, but you were not planning for the processing shop to be open for a year and a half or 2 years, the innovation grant might not be a good fit for you at this time. But if you are, you're already in the process, you already got the building and you're just looking for some equipment to put in it, and it could be up and running a lot sooner than that, then certainly I would consider applying.
And the USDA also has offered various programs for meat processing facilities. We didn't cover those in our work to sort of summarize programs, but I would encourage you to look for other opportunities for that processing level, specifically within meat. So the last question posted here, and we're about ready to wrap up, but we'll still take a few more questions. What about sheep wool and alpaca fiber as ag products raised on my farm and on other farms in Missouri? So is
Yeah,
processing that?
processing that would qualify. And yes, wool and alpaca fiber would be considered agricultural products.
Thank you so much again for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. We hope you found this a useful webinar. We do have another one scheduled, as was mentioned in the chat earlier. On April 6th, we're going to take a step back and have a shorter half-hour focused on best practices for preparing grant proposals. It'll be an interactive webinar with Alice and I, walking you through some exercises to think about how to sharpen your writing skills. And you can register at the Missouri Ag, Food, and Forestry Innovation Center website on our events page. And with that, I think we can close and stop the recording. Thank you again.